How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Allowed guide series on Candlekeep Mysteries, a 5th edition module. In today's video, we're going to be looking at Mazfroths Might Digressions and all the amazing content therein. Of course, there's going to be a ton of spoilers, so players do not watch this, but DMs that want added insight on running this excellent book, go ahead and stick around because we have a lot to cover. So here we are, our adventure starts in the illustrious Candlekeep, as many of the adventures do. Your players uncover a book that has only been recently brought here. In fact, it was only brought here a few days ago. This adventure is going to have your players get attacked by a book and then discover that many books are attacking people, and it's going to lead your players all the way to Baldurs Gate, where they're going to uncover a gang of jackalwares that are selling evil books, but it doesn't have to be all evil. Your players may go ahead and decide to negotiate some things out. So your players might be reading this book, Mazfroths Might Digressions, for the purposes of trying to understand magic in the weave, lycanthropy in its origins, demon lords in the abyss. Your players are reading this book, and presumably the group as a whole is reading this. Maybe they're just over each other's shoulder, sitting at a table or whatever. But in the middle of reading this book is going to attack them. And why does this book attack them? Because this is a Gingwatsim. Now, Gingwatsims are essentially a different type of mimic. They are a weird ectoplasmic being that can transform into different things. But the creepy thing is your players are reading this book, and then you have your players roll initiative. On the first turn of the combat here, the Gingwatsim is going to transform into its true self. What is its true self? Well, unfortunately, we don't get any art of it, but you can just go ahead and read off the description that this thing is just flat out creepy. It will try to consume the PC's life energy until it is destroyed. All the while, it terrorizes the prey with telepathic messages saying, "Feed me" or "Need life." So right from the get-go, your players are like, oh, what's going on here? This thing is creepy, and not only is it creepy, but it's pretty freaking strong. 39 HP at level 2 here might be a lot for your players to go through. And more importantly, look at that attack, the energy drain. It's going to use the energy drain after that first turn of transforming back to its true self. It is then going to attack. See that damage there? 16 damage on average. That is usually more than likely going to knock people out, which is really bad. In fact, actually, the game I ran, this thing outright killed somebody. Pretty cool. Here in what's going on, we get the full description of what is going on. A jackalware gang is making these books and selling them because they want money. What do they want that money for? They want to resurrect a Lamia. And in order to do that, they have to sell these incredibly expensive books, get 1,000 GP worth of diamonds, and then they'll go ahead and bring back their patron. So what sucks for these jackalwares is a lot of the money that they're earning from selling all of these books and scrolls and whatever else, unfortunately goes to the corrupt system that is Baldurs Gate, because they're getting swept up in the bribery and corruption and have to pay off a ton of people. But here's the really important kicker here. Korvala, the matron, the leader of these jackalwares, does not know that the Gingwatsims are killing people. The jackalwares are more on the up and up. They're not chaotic evil. They're not going around trying to murder people. They are simply trying to earn enough gold. And unfortunately, this is an unintended outcome. Once your players have dealt with the Gingwatsim in their hands, they're probably going to be curious. I would go ahead and just have an Avowed show up and be like, oh, goodness gracious, that's the 3rd time that's happened. And that is probably going to send your players into a adventure spiral. This has happened 3 times now? What's going on? And then you can go ahead and tell them all about it. You can tell your players that these 3 books have come to Candlekeep in the past 2 months, and the Avowed keep records of people who brought in these books. And 2 people that brought in these books are still here. To ensure that your players buy into the adventure, the Avowed are willing to go ahead and give your players a reward. And this reward is actually pretty freaking good. The Avowed are willing to offer up a Helm of Comprehend Languages if they can get to the bottom of this whole mess. That is a pretty freaking awesome reward at such an early level. So, once your players start asking around, they can learn the identity of 2 individuals still here that they can go ahead and talk to. The first person that they can talk to is the Illyrian High Scroll. Your players talk to Illyrian, and Illyrian will be startled to hear that the book that they brought in is in fact a monster in disguise. If your players ask the right questions, then they will learn a significant amount of information here. 10 days ago, Illyrian bought the book from a market stall in the Wide, which is a crowded marketplace in Baldurs Gate. They remember that the stall's name had the word Dune in it, but can't remember much else. The second person your players can come into contact with is Valor. Your players go ahead and talk to Valor. However, Valor isn't exactly much for talking. It is going to require a DC 15 persuasion check or being extremely polite and persistent questioning in order to convince her to talk. She is going to go ahead and give almost the same information, but just a little bit less. Your players meet these two individuals, Valor being a knight, and Illyrian High Scroll being an acolyte. So they both have brought in books that have attacked people. Valor is an honorable individual, and Illyrian is a good person. So what I think should happen is, if your players go ahead and ask for their services, they should go ahead and offer them up. And the reason for that is because your players could be getting in way over their heads. In this adventure, this level 2 adventure, your PCs are incredibly weak. They're going up against some incredibly tough foes if it does come down to combat. So if you know for a fact you have a group that likes to be combative, then maybe it'll be a good idea to have the Knight and the Acolyte join them on their adventures. Once your players have gathered up all the information that they need, the fact that it's in Baldurs Gate, and they have to search for a bookstall in the wide, your players should head over to Baldurs Gate. Along the journey to Baldurs Gate, your players can get ambushed by a were-rat. So once again, a were-rat is incredibly tough for a level 2 group, purely because, depending on the group that you have, they may not be able to do any damage to it. If your players don't have any silvered weapons or magical weapons and only physical type attackers, then this is going to be bad. Of course, if you've got people that have cantrips, then you can naturally do damage over time. But this attack doesn't need to come down to you killing this were-rat. If your players kill all 3 of the giant rats, or if your players deal 14 damage to the were-rat Mushika, then Mushika is going to go ahead and run away. Now, I like this because I like enemies running away. Because you know what that means? They can come back later, which is exactly what Mushika is going to do later on. Your players arrive to the wide, the marketplace in Baldurs Gate, and there they begin searching high and low for the place which they may know has the name Dune in it. Thankfully, finding this doll isn't too difficult. All you need to do is simply ask around and your players can find it, especially if they know it's got the name Dune in it. Otherwise, your players can just go ahead and make a DC 10 persuasion check or simply search for an hour. During this time, you should make the wide come to life. You should go ahead and describe to them all the amazing sights that they're seeing and all of the crazy stuff that's going on here. Go ahead and tell them about Autumn's bread, coppers to crowns, gems for all. Make them feel like this world is being lived in, not living for them. And something I strongly recommend here is, in addition to all of these stalls, one thing I would strongly recommend is having a weapons shop that sells silvered weapons. Maybe they could be incredibly cheap silvered weapons like daggers or arrows, but at least give them the opportunity to get silvered weapons, because that is going to be very important if they go down a combative route later on. So this is where the adventure is really going to diversify here. If you have a combative group, then things can go really bad here, because if they immediately start accusing the Amberdune workers here, then of course the guards are going to get involved. And of course, if your players start spouting crazy things like, oh, these books kill people, or whatever else they say, then of course the guards are going to look at them like they're crazy. Should your players go down the sneaky route, however, they'll be able to observe for a while. And there they'll see that at any given point, there is always 2 workers at the stall, and they work in shifts. In addition to that, they'll see a woman who comes by and checks in occasionally. The 2 workers always move in pairs, however she can move on her own. She's going to check in every 2 hours to see what's going on. During that time, go ahead and show off that, yeah, some of these goods are being sold, and these books range from anywhere between 25 gold to 250 gold. So once again, I strongly recommend that if you have a combative group here, you immediately exclaim that there are guards walking around, and of course going down the combative route would be disastrous. It would land them in jail, absolutely no issue. So if they go down the sneaky route, they could go ahead and tail Korvala all the way back to the Amberdune Hideout. Following any of the Jackalwares back to their hideout is going to require a DC 13 stealth check. If your players succeed, they can follow them back to the hideout no problem. But if they fail, then of course they are sussed out, and the Jackalwares are going to go ahead and return to Korvala and inform them that, hey, that they're being followed. Should your players go down a diplomatic route where they go ahead and talk to any of the werejackals, then I would strongly recommend that you go ahead and have Korvala show up relatively soon, unless they're specifically waiting for Korvala to leave. If your players try to be cordial about this, saying, hey, we know something's up here, let's go ahead and keep this on the down low, then the Jackalwares could go ahead and say, hey, we're just going to call the guards on you. If Korvala is there, she can go ahead and say, hey, let's slow things down here. Let's go ahead and talk in a more private place because we don't want to do this in public. Hopefully your players are willing to buy into a private meeting, but if your players think that this is some sort of a trap or whatever, and they want to have it publicly, then of course you're going to have to tread on light waters here, because you don't want the Jackowars to reveal themselves, and if your players don't have any actual proof, then the guards are going to immediately suspect that the PCs are on the wrong side here. Here in the Amberdune pack, we get some incredible detail about the Jackoware gang. We get how they are loyal to Nidalia, the Lamia, and we learn of the 7 Jackowares that are part of this organization. And there's just a sentence describing their personality, which is more than enough. I love seeing that. Just a single sentence really makes an NPC come to life. And something very important to note here is role-playing the Jackowares. The Jackowares, they are pretty good at lying, but they buckle if they don't have leadership by their side. So they are much more confident when Korvala is around. And also important to note is that they are not natively hostile. They do not aim to try and kill people. What they will do first and foremost in combat is try and use their sleep gaze to subdue people. And of course, they are very reluctant to fight people that have silvered weapons and magical attacks. And we get some great information here on Korvala herself, about how she has the mantle of responsibility for her pack, and now with the death of their patron, this is even worse. She has so much to bear. And what's really cool to note here is Korvala knows how to make these Gingwood seams, but the thing is during life, the Lamia had placed a spell on Korvala, specifically a Gesh spell, to prevent from spilling the beans on how to perform the spell. So if your players were to deal with Korvala in a combative way and she dies, then no more Gingwood seam. But if your players ask, hey, can you teach us how to make Gingwood seams? Then she's going to say, no, I'm under a spell and I can't do that. She's no longer under the spell, of course, but she's going to say that to try and cover her tracks. Should your players either tail any of the Jackowares or decided to meet with them in private, then they're going to be led through Blackgate. If Mushika was left alive, then Mushika is going to go ahead and strike back. Should your players be traveling through Blackgate, not accompanied by any of the Jackowares, then Mushika is going to have a swarm of rats and 2 thugs go ahead and jump the party. The reason these thugs have joined Mushika is because Mushika has promised to give some lycanthropy over if they go ahead and slay the characters. If either the swarm or the 2 thugs are defeated, Mushika will try and run away. But here's the important thing, if your players are accompanied by the Jackowares, then Mushika does not strike. There's definitely a lot you can play around with this. You could have it where Mushika jumps the party, sees a Jackoware, and then says, oh, screw that, and runs away. And this will be interesting because your players will be curious. Why would the were-rat not jump the party this time? What is it about the individual or individuals your players are with that makes it so that this were-rat doesn't want to fight? And of course, there's something to be said of if your players were able to capture Mushika, then perhaps Mushika could go ahead and say, oh, I know for a fact that those things are lycanthropes and they have a powerful person on their side, a Lamia. So if your players take the sneaky approach and make their way here, then depending on the time of day is going to change how many people are here. At night, the whole gang is here, but during the day, 2 Jackowares are manning the stalls, so there will be less numbers here. If your players came through the diplomatic approach, then Korvala is going to go ahead and invite them over to her office, and that is where she can go ahead and sit down and talk to the players and say, hey, here's what's going on. If your players go ahead and go down the combative approach, however, then things are going to be really bad because they storm the place, and the Jackowares are going to go ahead and fight back. But as you can see here on the map, the Jackowares are not alone. They have a pretty powerful ally on their side, a massive rug of smothering. So let's go ahead and go through the areas really quickly, and then we can go over the roleplay approaches. In Area 1, we have the common room. This is the only entrance to this location. When your players walk inside, they can see that there's 2 doors. But the important thing to note here is that if there is any combat going down here, then that rug of smothering is going to zoop right up and try and nab somebody. In Area 2, we have the kitchen. Currently, there are 2 Jackowares in there cooking up some dinner, but of course, if there is any noise outside, then they are likely to investigate. The important thing to note here is that because they're inside their own hideout, then some of them are going to get more comfortable and be in their more natural selves, and one of them is going to be in their Jackoware form. In Area 3, we have the corridor dormitory. When your players make their way inside of here, they'll be able to see a Jackoware. If they come in stealthily, then one of them is sleeping, but if they're making some noise, then presumably they're going to wake up. In Area 4, we have Korvala's office. In here is where your players are going to presumably sit down to have some talks, where Korvala will go ahead and explain the whole situation. The important thing to note here is that she is not alone in this room at any given time. In fact, along the wall are 2 Ging Seams, so she'd be feeling pretty confident with some monsters by her side. If your players are willing to hear her out, she'll go ahead and exclaim all the information that is vital here. She'll go ahead and say, yes, we're doing this for money, we're trying to resurrect our patron. I made these Ging Seams, and I instructed them to take the form of these books. But most important of all, you have her exclaim, I didn't know that they were going to kill people. In fact, I ordered them not to. And if your players are feeling like there is some sort of negotiation to be had here, then she can go ahead and say, hey, you know, if things come to it, I can go ahead and give you the real copies of the books and we can let things slide. Inside of this room, there is a trapdoor that leads to Area 6, and we'll be getting to all of that roleplay fun stuff in a moment. In Area 5, we have the storage room, and here are more books waiting to be sold. Inside of this room, your players can discover a wooden trunk. However, unfortunately, it's a mimic. And if your players go ahead and make their way too close to it, the mimic is going to go ahead and strike out and eat because it is starving. Located in this room, if your players are feeling rather loot happy, then they will be able to discover 50 gold worth of assorted copper, silver, and electrum coins scattered around the bottom. In Area 6, we have the hidden vault. Inside of here, your players will be able to see 2 padlocked wooden trunks. Trying to break into either one of them is going to require a DC 15 Thieves Tools check, or it's going to require a DC 17 strength check to try and bust it open. The first trunk contains Nidalia's Desiccated Heart, which is going to be used for that resurrection later on. The second trunk contains a whole bunch of incredibly awesome books, one of which is of course the aforementioned Mazfroths Might Digressions. So here's the thing, if your players come into this expecting combat, then combat will be waiting for them. However, it's probably not going to go good. If you've got a whole bunch of martial people on your side, and they don't have silvered weapons, they're going to be worthless because they can't do any damage to the Jackalwares. In addition to that, combat is incredibly tough here because there is a lot of these Jackalwares and the Rug of Smothering. So the first thing that's going to happen if combat immediately rises, your players rush in, swords raised and ready to attack, the Jackalwares are going to use that sleep gaze to try and incapacitate anybody. In particular, they're going to try and hit any sort of wizard-like individuals. In addition to that, of course, the Rug of Smothering is going to try and immediately grapple one person, and that's really bad because that's going to effectively take someone out of the fight. So combat here is incredibly tough at level 2. But hey, it's D&D, anything's possible. You can always roll really bad and your players can roll really good. And of course, your players could be outfitted perfectly for this situation, in which case a bloodbath could occur. Your players deal with all of the werejackals in here. They deal with Korvala, and guess what? No more books going around eating people. Awesome stuff. What's really good is, if your players go down the route of killing everybody, but they don't get all the questions answered right away, then you can go ahead and have your players roll a investigation check with a DC 10. If they succeed, then they can go ahead and find that trapdoor and all therein lies within. And of course, they can find the keys on Korvala's person, and then they can go down and discover the heart, but more importantly, the books that they probably want to return to Candlekeep. If your players demand that the books be returned and offer nothing in return, the Jackalwares aren't going to have any of that. They want these books because they are incredibly valuable, so they're going to demand that they get something in return for these books. If nothing occurs, then of course combat is going to ensue. But if your players go down the negotiation route, where they talk to the Jackalwares and say, hey, we understand that you're trying to resurrect someone, let's go ahead and sort things out here. Your players can work up a deal with these Jackalwares, and maybe there's a symbiotic relationship to be had here. Maybe your players can work alongside the Jackalwares to earn enough gold. If your players are able to work out some sort of deal with the Jackalware gang, then they can get those books, return them to Candlekeep, and there they'll be bestowed a Helm of Comprehend Languages, a pretty awesome reward, and theoretically is possible without combat. As long as your players hold up their end of the bargain, if they go down the negotiation route, then they're going to have some awesome allies by their side, the Jackalwares. And later on, once they earn enough gold, then they'll have a Lamia by their side, Nidalia. That is awesome. That right there is a font of amazing adventure to be had if they have a Jackalware gang and a Lamia as their ally. But of course, it could be the opposite route. If your players go down the combative route, then they're going to have an enemy and an antagonist going up against them. If Korvala lives during this whole event, then she's going to get pissed off naturally and probably try and harass the party. And you can go ahead and have some fun with that. Maybe some more Ging Seams attack them, or maybe she learns some other spells to go ahead and harass the party. And of course, if your players go down the route of helping them but then turn against them, then Nidalia is going to really not like that. Nidalia will not betray her allies, but she will go against anybody that would betray her. So all in all, this is a pretty awesome adventure. Your players can make some awesome friends, they can make some enemies, they can have some antagonists. There's a lot of great reoccurring things that can happen here. Your party can make friends with Valor or Yalirian. Your players can make an enemy in a were-rat that always attacks them in Mushika, but Mushika is never successful. Your players can make friends or enemies of a Jaguar gang and a Lamia. There's a great number of things that can happen outside of the scope of this adventure, and that's what I like about it. You can go ahead and leave it as open-ended, or you can go ahead and see this into an actual adventure and have some awesome plot lines for later on. All in all, Mazfroths Might Digressions allows your players to approach this adventure in a number of ways, and that is awesome for a one-shot. I like the fact that your players can go ahead and be subtle, they can go ahead and be tricksy. Heck, theoretically, your players could go ahead and sneak in there somehow and steal the books away without even allowing the Jaguars to know what happened. You know, there's a lot of outcomes to this adventure. It really comes down to the creativity of your players. This adventure was a blast to run, and I know it's going to be a blast for everyone to play in. So go ahead and tell me, are your players going to get a kick out of going up against a were-rat multiple times? Are your players going to do something dumb and get arrested? In fact, when I ran it, some people got arrested, but that was pretty funny. And how are your players going to handle dealing with the Jaguar gang in the end? Go ahead and tell me all of those things because I want to know. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. And thank you to all my amazing patrons up here. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much. That is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for listening. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.